Hey George, thank you for joining the call. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm good. How are you?
All good, all good. So anybody who's listening to this conversation, George Felix is a clinical psychologist. Now, rather than me getting into detail of it, मैं खुद बहुत confused होता हूँ clinical psychologist क्या होता है, psychiatrist क्या होता है, and then psychotherapy क्या होता है, therapy क्या होता है, and so forth. So instead of me delving into it, मैं खुद जॉर्ज से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि बॉस सबसे पहला जो सवाल है, ये clinical psychologist क्या होता है?
I think that's also a good place to start because in common public also there's a lot of confusion. बहुत ज़्यादा confusion है कि खासकर psychiatrist और psychologist के अंदर तो बहुत ज़्यादा ही confusion होता है. So essentially I'll just give a rundown of everything so that all the designations are clear once and for all. A psychiatrist is essentially a medical doctor. So they have done an MBBS. Post the MBBS, they have done 3 years of MD in psychiatry, after which they are called a psychiatrist. So that's essentially for psychiatrists. Their major mode of treatment is through medications, majorly. They also do therapies, but mostly through medications. Then we have clinical psychologists who have done their masters in psychology. Post that, they've done 2 years of MPhil in clinical psychology. Post doing the MPhil, they get a license from the government to practice as clinical psychologists. So that's the difference.
Okay.
Clinical.
If a psychologist सिर्फ क्लिनिकल साइकोलॉजिस्ट होता है बिकॉज देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ टर्मिनोलॉजीज दैट गोज अराउंड कि भाई ये साइकोलॉजिस्ट से कंसल्ट कर दो. जब वो बोलते हैं साइकोलॉजिस्ट से कंसल्ट कर दो, आर दे रेफरिंग टू द क्लिनिकल साइकोलॉजिस्ट और साइकोलॉजिस्ट एक डिफरेंट ब्रांच ऑफ इट सेगमेंट होता है?
You're right. That's a good question also. So it's clinical psychology is a specialization almost. Psychology या psychologist is a broad term. So anyone who has a master's in psychology can call themselves a psychologist. Anyone who has a master's in psychology can call themselves a psychologist.
Okay.
All right. Clinical psychologists have a specialization into clinical issues of mental health, mental disorder, and all of those, all sorts.
I'll come to that one. उससे पहले एक सवाल ये भी है कि there is also a profession called therapy. अब ये therapy, is it mental therapy? I mean, rather than me getting into it, मुझे ये जानना था. अब ये अगर मैं एक बहुत बेसिक लेवल पे पूछूं, साइकोलॉजिस्ट, क्लिनिकल साइकोलॉजिस्ट, देन थेरेपी, देन साइकियाट्रिस्ट, ये जो मेजर 4-5 सेक्शन है उसमें पहले सबसे पहले थेरेपी क्या होता है फिर?
ओके, सो थेरेपी का बेसिकली मतलब होता है ट्रीटमेंट.
अच्छा.
That's the basic meaning of therapy. Therapy means treatment. अब वो थेरेपी दवाइयों की थेरेपी हो सकती है, which will be called pharmacotherapy, या pharmaceutical जो थेरेपीज होती है वो, तो वो दवाइयों की थेरेपी हो सकती है. Then you also have psychological therapies, जो होती है आपकी counseling and psychotherapy. Now I'll just explain what roles do what kind of work. So psychiatrists largely do medical therapy or medication based therapy. Clinical psychologists and counselors, they do generally psychological form of therapy, which is non-medicine based therapy.
Okay.
हाँ.
So अगर मैं गलत नहीं हूँ तो फिर मेंटल हेल्थ के अंदर ही आपके पास 5-6 सेक्शन आते हैं. वन साइकोलॉजिस्ट, क्लिनिकल साइकोलॉजिस्ट, then you have a therapy, then you have a psychiatrist, right? And within the psychology itself is a broader umbrella under which the different section comes. One of the streamline or one of the specialization is clinical psychologist, is it?
Yes. So let me summarize that so that it will become more clearer. So there are different professionals which come under mental health treatment: psychiatrists, clinical psychologists. Then you have counselors or psychologists, जिनको आप term में बोल सकते हैं. They all have different kinds of treatments which are called therapies. So medical or medicine-based therapies largely done by psychiatrists. Psychological therapies are done by counseling या फिर counselors या फिर clinical psychologists. All right. So professional उनके treatments क्या हैं, उस हिसाब से इसको organize कर सकते हैं हम.
Okay. So as a clinical psychologist, जब आप as when you work as a clinical psychologist, what are the special cases or what are the special area of mental health that you look after?
Okay, so clinical psychologists are trained in their which is their professional degree. They're trained to, they're exposed and trained to work with a vast variety of individuals going through mental disorders, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, OCD, ADHD, autism. So, a lot of different disorders or dysfunctions of the mind. They're trained in their training too. So, we are not trained in medication based treatment. So, we don't treat through medication, we treat therapy. Therapy is essentially a treatment using psychological techniques, which generally involves conversations with people about their past, about their current issues, helping in processing, uncovering whatever difficulties that they're having. It is a non-medicine based form of treatment that goes on. So yes, clinical psychologists, no other, except for psychiatrists, no other doctor or psychologist or professional or mental health professional is licensed to give medical or medication based treatment for mental health disorders.
ओके सो ये कुछ ऐसा होता है क्या, आई मीन दिस में साउंड फनी एज वेल, बट कई लोगों को भूत दिखता है या फिर जाले दिख रहे हैं या फिर डियर जिंदगी में, आप अगर आई एम श्योर मूवी देखा होगा, नहीं भी देखा होगा तो डियर जिंदगी में शाहरुख खान प्लेज अ मेजर रोल जहाँ पे वो आलिया भट्ट की काउंसलिंग करता है. सो वहां पे भी वो उसको मेडिसिन नहीं देता, बट ही शी सिट एंड देन डिस्कस अबाउट द प्रॉब्लम एंड स्टेटमेंट एंड देन छोटे छोटे टिप्स देता है, ट्रिक्स देता है. इज दैट अ मेजर रोल और देयर आर लॉट टू इट?
Yes, that's essentially therapy. What was going on in that movie? वो जिस तरह का जो ट्रीटमेंट था, जो कॉन्वर्सेशन बेस्ड जो ट्रीटमेंट था, एनालिसिस ऑफ ड्रीम्स, पैशंस, पास्ट, करंट इश्यूज, whatever that bringing up in the session, that is essentially what therapy looks like, can look like. Obviously, there are various different ways to do therapy, but yes, that was a therapeutic based treatment that was going on in that movie.
Okay, so connected to that, my first question was, so a lot of people also get an illusion of a lot of things, and that is in it also being treated by a mental health professional. Is that also fall under the part of your clinical psychologist as a professional?
Yes, so illusion, I'm not very clear what you mean by that, but I'm
so when I say illusion, when I say illusion, George, it means suppose मैं कहीं बैठा हुआ हूँ and suddenly I'm getting an illusion that I'm seeing the dead bodies or I'm seeing the something falling on my feet or falling on all from the top and so on and so forth. There are a lot of illusion that comes and then people suddenly, आप कई बार होते हुए रात को आप सो नहीं पाते हो, बहुत गंदी तरीके से ड्रीम आ रही है, आपके पास्ट एक्सपीरियंसेस आपको हॉन्ट कर रहे हैं, so on and so forth.
Yes, so these are symptoms commonly in various different mental health conditions. Can also be symptoms of schizophrenia, can also be symptoms of some kind of trauma or PTSD. So yes, this also comes under the profession of, basically comes under mental health professionals' work. So yeah, that's very accurate in that way. Obviously, the perception is that it's probably happening due to some outer forces or some magical, powers, all of that. But that's where the mental health comes in, because these can be symptoms of mental health difficulties that the person is having. Yeah.
Okay. In one of the papers that I have read, you mentioned about the unmet core emotional needs. Okay. Where you have spoke about the factor that's unmet emotional need that many of have gone through because we have not gone through a lot of good parenting altogether as a skill. What do you mean by when you say as an unmet emotional need?
Okay, so specifically what we're talking about there is childhood's unmet core emotional needs, because that's important in the way because it shapes the person. एक तरह से उनको, उनके माइंड को, उनके डेवलपमेंट को इन्फ्लुएंस करती हैं वो नीड्स जो चाइल्डहुड में उनकी अनमेट जाती है. सो स्पेसिफिकली इट्स अबाउट certain emotional needs that go unmet in childhood. For instance, we all know that children have, when a baby is born, they have physical needs, which are obviously food, water, shelter. In common terms, we call it roti, kapda, makan. Basically, those very basic, simple needs that physical needs that every human baby has. What we also have found out through years and years of research and work is that there are also emotional needs, universal emotional needs that children need to get in order to develop into psychological individuals. We are very different from other organisms, we are very different from other creatures in terms of that our brains are very complicated. We are our brains can think about space, they can plan, they can have reasoning, they can be self-aware, they can have consciousness, they can have spirituality. We can also have things like basic connection, basic community, basic sense of safety with other people, basic relationships with other people, basic ways of looking at ourselves. Lot of complicated functions the human brain has to go through. This sort of development that happens, इस तरह का जो विकास होने के लिए जो चीज जरूरी है, that sort of analyze it down to certain basic core emotional needs that the child, that the baby needs to get in order to develop into a fully functioning adult human being who can go through life, tolerate stresses, who can learn how to bounce back from any kind of life stress. ऐसा तो है नहीं कि stress होगा नहीं, it's going to inevitably happen, but the sense of bouncing back from some or the other kind of stress, resilience, being able to experience some kind of joy, some kind of relaxation, some kind of achievement, we can trace it back down to these emotional needs in childhood. There are plenty of emotional needs that are there. ऐसा नहीं है कि there's just a very limited number. There are plenty of them. But broadly speaking, for example, needs can be like just a sense of having consistent presence of parents or caregivers, whoever is taking care of the baby. Something very simple like that, having consistent psychological presence of the parents when the baby is crying out for something, for food, for shelter, for whatever it may be. The presence of parents tending to the child's needs, the presence of the parents or the caregivers modeling what human communication looks like, what behavior looks like, how to solve problems, the need for giving the child a sense of confidence that you can do this, you are separate from us, you are an individual, and that you can do things on your own, and we are here to encourage you with that. So hence the child develops a sense of identity that हाँ ठीक है, मैं कर सकता हूँ चीजें खुद से, और मुझे बैकअप करने के लिए मेरे caregivers हैं. If I were to fail or fall back, they are going to be there. So that sense of safety or support. Another set of needs can be just having the freedom, एक तरह का freedom हो कि हम अपने जो needs है या फिर अपने जो feelings है वो हमारे caregivers के साथ में share कर पाएं. Every child has that sense that they can have the freedom to just express, कि हमको express करना कि हम we are not liking something, or that we want more food, or that we want to play with that person, or we don't like that person, or that person is scaring us, so I'm feeling scared at night. Just those very basic sense of expression of what they're feeling. It's surprising, it seems very basic, but it's surprising that some families will not give this very basic thing to the child. They will try to suppress it in some way. What is this? Don't make a fuss. Keep quiet. Don't behave like a child. So all of these things, these sort of needs are important, and that's why we, as psychologists, we are very aware from a long time. In fact, we're very aware how much childhood shapes the individual who grows up then. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it totally makes sense, because I personally have seen a lot of family, they do not know. In fact, बचपन में एक बहुत बड़ा basic assumption होता है कि आप बच्चे को डरा दिए कुछ नहीं करने की वजह से, या फिर धमका दिए, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of way to do it. But the point is, at the same time, I mean, though logically it makes sense, and when you go through the research wise, it totally makes sense. But how do you think that parents would be aware? Because parents so it's like you also learn through the process, and parents themselves when you yourself have not been positioned to receive it at the moment. So suppose I myself have not been in position to where, not only me, I think more than 90% of Indian kids, or maybe the 90s kids, did not have a so-called emotional unmet need, as you mentioned it rightly. Probably they might not have received. So in that case, when you yourself have not received a similar kind of need and you yourself have been left out, in that case, how do you think that they can make sure that their kids do not suffer from the same?
that's a very good observation also कि अगर हमारी needs ही meet नहीं हुई है, if there
Correct.
is some deficit we have grown up as adults, how can we prevent that from happening to our own children? It's a very important question because and that's also the first step, is to just acknowledge and say this out loud, what you've done, that I acknowledge that, or that we acknowledge that a lot of our needs, for that matter, emotional needs in childhood, were unmet. Because otherwise what happens is that there are blindfolds that I think I have had a perfect childhood, or that everything was fine, and I know how to raise children, and then inevitably we transmit the same problematic behaviors onto our children as well. Well, the first thing that really helps parents, it's a simple thing which helps for every problem, is obviously awareness and education. Now, this is a very external form. So, young parents who are young parents, or those who are expecting, or those who are planning, can go through reading materials, can go through coaching, can go through a lot of different formats nowadays that are happening, which will help them with with getting aware of what the child should get. That's an easy way, very simple way, which most of the parents are also taking nowadays. It's coming to India also, this sort of a practice of getting into coaching. The second thing is what you also mentioned in terms of parents getting. So the thing is that this is, I'm simplifying, oversimplifying this a lot, but oftentimes we treat those below us in hierarchy, basically those below us, the way we have been treated by those who are above us. Oftentimes this happens. So there are ways to learn it. So that's one thing, is you educate yourself. So you get aware and then you educate yourself. That's one way. Educate yourself through coaching, through institution, through professionals who are into parenting coaching and all of that. That's one thing that can happen. That's an easy way to do. The more deeper way to do that, and this is difficult, and this is also very important, and this is the only thing that's going to make lasting changes, is to understand and do inner work for yourself. Even though you're aware or not aware, there are a lot of things that go on unconsciously in people's lives, and it is required that people who are going to start having kids go through some or the other kind of inner work. Inner work basically means some kind of work that exposes or brings out their childhood or their memories in some or the other form. It can be through therapy, it can be through spirituality, it can be through some other kind of methods, that whatever is working for that individual, to bring out what has happened to them, so that they're aware, and then they first of all prevent that from happening to their children, and also give the children what they should be getting in some or the other form.
There is a major misunderstanding pertaining to the mental health. अभी भी जब मेंटल हेल्थ कहा जाता है, जनरली कहा जाता है ये बड़ों को होता है. इट ओनली हैपेंस टू द एडल्ट. दे डू नॉट कंसिडर दैट वाज इवन अ चाइल्ड नीड्स सम मेंटल हेल्थ, एंड दे also have to be, those things has to be taken care. And usually जब the way it has gone out together, parenting का एक बहुत अच्छा खासा शॉर्टकट ऑलमोस्ट सारे इस जनरेशन के सारे पेरेंट्स ने हैक किया है. बच्चों को कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा, कुछ नहीं शांत करना, चुपचाप यूट्यूब थमा दो. And the real cases I wanted to showcase, because मेरी एक niece है जो she is almost 6-year-old, and because she keeps on scrolling the YouTube shorts and all, so one day suddenly I was just watching her, and then she saw some of the videos where the guy is spanking a girl, and then suddenly one fine day she asked me, "Mama, ये condom क्या होता है?" And these things are actually coming from a 6-year-old kid. And when I'm referring to the 6-year, one of my nephew and the niece, this is the cases with a large chunk of the kids altogether. And बच्चों को तो जैसा मैंने कहा कि पेरेंट्स बहुत शॉर्टकट अपनाते हैं, एंड दे गिव इट टू द मोबाइल. उनके हाथ में एक मैजिक डिवाइस है, बस उनको दे दिया. बट व्हाट दे डू नॉट अंडरस्टैंड इज उसका repercussion क्या है, consequence क्या है, they mostly ignore it. So what are the things that can be actually taken care in those areas other than, because आप straight away mobile, you cannot tell them कि boss आप mobile हटा दो, नहीं, वो हो नहीं सकता है. Same times the way YouTube and everything is there, it is there, online streaming things are there. अब वो companies तो change करेगी नहीं उसमें. The best can be तो आप घर के environment वैसा make, you can make sure some things could be, I'll not say cut off, but rather minimize. So in that case, what are the best practices as per your understanding, or as that you suggest to your clients maybe?
So once again, very popular question. This is, I've heard this across YouTube as well, where people are asking about the reels and its effects on children's mind, basically what's going on. And overexposure बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाता है, about a lot of things which parents can't monitor also. So the first thing is also, let's also acknowledge that parenting in the current times, in the modern times, obviously it was difficult, had always been a difficult job to do, but in the current times with so many stimulus, mobile bhi hai, social media bhi hai, and then schools are also very modernized nowadays, it is tougher, it is way more tougher. The family system has also changed from joint to nuclear. Earlier one parent was working, but now both the parents typically are working. More isolated, less number of children. So in essence, parenting is a more challenging and difficult job. It makes sense sometimes, for parents to de-stress themselves, because children can bring a very, very high amount of stress. To de-stress themselves, they'll hand over a device or they'll hand over a tablet to the kid. In restaurants also, kids would be scrolling non-stop on mobile phones and tablets and doing something, some of the other real scrolling or something or the other on the phones. So the thing is, I'm also very curious about what would convince parents to not do that, because if we tell them very clearly that they are it's not good for their health, parents would probably want reasons why.
Correct.
But if you probably tell them that it's, so one of the examples that you gave, which is basically very early exposure to sexual content in some or the other way. In that case, the parents can get scared and frightened that, okay, fine, this is something that has to be prevented. But in general, broadly speaking, a lot of research also on that continuous reel scrolling in adults and children wherever is impacting the brain's attention system. It does impact. And since children are in that growing phase, it is changing their brains in a very fundamental way, structurally changing the brain. Right when they are learning at that stage of life to develop some kind of focus or attention, it changes that circuitry and they are just constantly scrolling, getting boosts of attention, breaking off, getting more attention, breaking off, getting more attention, very fragmented attention in that way. Perhaps, I think, as a general system, as of now, since we don't have very concrete, I'd say, methods to tell parents कि ये नहीं करो, या फिर इससे ये चीजें होती है, the most basic generic advice is to start limiting the screen time instead of completely stopping it, to limit it and monitor that in some way. So for instance, if you notice your child is doing this for, let's say, 2-3 hours, limit it to probably only 15 minutes or probably only half an hour in the day where they get to scroll reels. That's one option. The second is obviously to put filters. There are a lot of phones with parental filters that have come up. To put filters on YouTube, to put filters on the devices so that the content which is not supposed to be for children is not displayed to children. That's one thing that can be done. Overall, I think, these are some of the things that can be taken care of. But see, the question then again comes, what is making, I'm sure somewhere people know that this is harmful. I'm sure that a part of them knows. Then the question comes of, can we in some way make the parents aware of how they should manage their own stress, so that they don't have to give devices to their children so that they can take care of one stress in their life, which is their children. Maybe perhaps that can be one idea. I'm just thinking out loud here. But perhaps that can be one idea where parents are taught how to manage their stress, work stress, or whatever relationship stress that they're having, so that they don't have to do these technology exposures to their children so that they can feel calmer at home. Yeah, I hope. Yeah.
Okay, so I know the entire conversation is turning out to more of a parenting session. Question is with respect to when it comes to the balancing between the emotional support we need it, kids need it, childs need it, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, with respect to living a mental health, and when you are living in a very highly exposed environment altogether, where do you think that balance comes in, and how to foster, especially when it comes to the child?
So they are not very different. Emotional support is part of mental health in the broader sense of the term. I think what you're also trying to ask is that in a very information overload world,
Correct.
how do we take care of our mental health for
Correct,
children?
correct. For the children especially, because I know for the adults, but still there are a lot of mechanism that they can totally cut off, they can go somewhere and so on and so forth. But for the kids, how to balance it out?
So it's the role of the parents to. I know this once again we're talking about parenting, but it's the role of the parents
Okay, okay.
to have monitoring. So, in the sense, parents, like you also mentioned, as adults, they can take care of their own issues, whatever that's happening in terms of how they want to cope, they want to cut off, relax, and go for a vacation and whatnot. But parenting is a full-time thing. It's not going to be very separate. If they are if
Correct.
they are if they are parents, their responsibility, part of the parenting, is that they are constantly uh, taking care of what their child is doing, being interested in what their child is doing, or how the child is spending time. It's part of the emotional needs also, because that's what the child also needs. Otherwise, the child will feel neglected in some or the other form. So, with that same approach comes also setting limits. This is appropriate, this is not appropriate. I understand. So parents basically communicating to their child that I understand that you need this right now, that you want your device, that you want to watch the TV, or you want to play for 1 more 2 more hours, but at the same time it's also important that we do this. I understand that you want this, but I think we need to do this. This is also very important. Just a simple communication that has to start from the beginning, which parents have been doing for a very long time. It's just that that element of stress comes in, whether they have their own problems, whether they have their own stress, and then they're not able to cope with the parenting role as well. That's a different discussion altogether. But essentially, as part of parenting, it's part of the job to also set limits, boundaries, give freedom, take it for some time, teach the kid how to delay instant मतलब gratification कि हमको अभी चाहिए तो अभी इसी वक्त चाहिए, to teach the kid how to not fall prey for that thing, to teach the kid how to tolerate frustration in some or the other way, to sit with frustration. So all of that is part of the emotional needs, part of the mental health in the broader sense.